Enjoy, have fun. Yes, and for us, turn to the book of Habakkuk. Notes are there on the back of your bulletin. Some questions for at the end. All right. Habakkuk. We will finish out chapter 1 and dive a little bit into chapter 2 this morning. But last week and, this past week, there's been a lot of tragedy in our nation, many people going through a lot of things. And the one thing I really like about Habakkuk is it is very applicable to where I think a lot of us are. Last week, we asked, does God care? This week, we're asking, is God fair? Habakkuk's asking that. God, why are you allowing this to happen? And for many of us, we wonder and we question, whether we say it or not, we have question in our minds, is God fair? We live in a society that is often unfair, right? And it shouldn't surprise us. We are sinners, and when we encounter other sinners, there's going to be issues. We're going to have problems with other people, but I don't think we would have a problem saying that life isn't fair sometimes when we're dealing with sinners. But when it comes to God, and we ask that question, is God fair? We struggle with that. I think we all do in one way or another. Should we even say that question out loud or have that thought? And this morning, I want you to remember what Habakkuk is going through. Remember, Judah had gone through this period of great spiritual reform, and then the leader died, and now the Chaldeans are coming in. God is gonna use them to conquer Judah, and Habakkuk is seeing all this, and he's all torn up about it, and he asks God, why, God? Why are you allowing this to happen? Yes, Judah, why are you allowing Judah to embrace this wickedness? Why are you allowing all these things? And the Lord answered him and said, I'm doing something that you don't even understand. I'm doing something greater than what you understand. And, you can look at the other books here, Joel, you can look at Zephaniah, you can look at Amos. All those minor prophets prayed, God, please avert this. Turn it away. Make Judah repent, or whatever their exact words were. They're saying, God, help us turn back to you. Habakkuk never does that. He realizes God is going to do something. God is going to do something, and it's too late for the nation of Judah to repent. They've had tons of opportunities, and they've said no. So their judgment is coming. Last week, Habakkuk questioned God about whether or not he cared. God's answer was probably not what Habakkuk wanted to hear. He wanted God to say, yes, Judah is going to turn back to me. Judah is going to come back to repentance. But God didn't do that. So this morning, we're going to look at Habakkuk's second question, and that is God fair? Is God fair? So let's look at it. Look at verses 12 and 13. Habakkuk lacked a godly perspective. Verse 12, it says, are you not from everlasting, O Lord, my God, my Holy One? We shall not die. O Lord, you have ordained them as a judgment, and you, O rock, have established them for reproof. You who are pure eyes than to see evil and cannot look at wrong, why do you idly look at traitors and remain silent when the wicked swallows up the man more righteous than he? All right, so we're going to dive into this because I think we're going to learn a lot about Habakkuk's response to God's answer. And I think we can learn a lot about the fact that Habakkuk lacks a godly perspective, like many of us do, right? We can't always tell, what is God doing right now? What does God have in the mix? Or what's he doing in this certain situation? And Habakkuk lacks that perspective as well. However, I also think, and this can be true at the same time, Habakkuk has a right view of God. And we learn that here. Notice three things he says in verse 12 alone. He says, God is eternal. He is from everlasting. He realizes, God, you're not like us. God, you are bigger. You are greater. God fills all time. and dwells in all realm of eternity. There was no beginning. He's older than the universe. There was nothing that started God. He's always been. He is eternal. This is important to grasp as we work our way through this. Isaiah paints it like this: "For thus says the one who is high and lifted up, who inhabits eternity, whose name is holy. I dwell in the high and holy place, and also with him who is of a contrite and lowly spirit, to revive the spirit of the lowly and to revive the heart of the contrite." God is bigger. God is greater than what we could ever imagine. We can't fully, I don't think, grasp this concept that there was no beginning with God. In our lives, there's always a beginning. However, with God, there is not. We are limited by time. God is not. Second thing we learn, God is holy. He is the Holy One. He is absolutely pure. One author says, God's holiness is his utter separateness from everything else that exists, especially from all forms of evil. God is completely pure, holy. Isaiah again captures this. "And one called to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory." Although Habakkuk had a limited perspective on what was happening, he still recognized these amazing things about God. And we see this in verse 13 as well. He said, "You who are of purer eyes than to see evil." Habakkuk understood who God was. He didn't quite understand what was going on, but he understood, God, you are eternal, you are holy. And next he talks about that God is unchangeable. He says, we see him to refer to him as, "O rock." And we see this just a few times in the scriptures. It started with Moses used this term, and it speaks to God's unchangeableness, his immutability, if you will. In Deuteronomy 32:4, it says, "The rock, his work is perfect, for all his ways are justice, a God of faithfulness and without iniquity, just and upright is he." God is what he always was and will be. God does not change. God cannot change. One author, I read this week, he said, God will be what he is because he always is himself, unchanging in his love toward us because he cannot be anything else to those who are in Christ. These are huge, huge aspects, attributes of God. He's eternal. He's unchangeable. These are huge things we learn about God here. And I think they're very, very important because notice what Habakkuk has done here. He says, yes, God, I have my questions. I don't understand what's going on. I lack that perspective that you have, but this doesn't change who you are. I recognize who you are and these attributes of you. This doesn't mean he fully understands or likes what's happening. I remember one time, I don't know why I thought of this week. It's ice cream season, I guess. One time we went to Dairy Queen. Kids were excited. I was excited, even though I'm not a huge Dairy Queen person. However, when it's hot, it's the middle of summer, you want ice cream. So we go up there and we're going to get ice cream. And, we're going down the list. Everybody's going through their little list of things they want. And it's never the same. And we go up there and fully expecting to order what we want because there's no signs up. And we ask for a dilly bar, and they say, we don't have those. We asked for a dip cone. They didn't have those either. We asked for a blizzard. They didn't have those either. All they ended up having was ice cream cakes and milkshakes. Now, we go there expecting them to have ice cream, right? We expect them to have what they claim to have. Imagine our frustration when we realize an ice cream place doesn't have ice cream, right? We've all been there. It wasn't McDonald's, and their ice cream machine's always broken. However, I think about Habakkuk in a similar way. He knows who God is. He knows what God is like. He knows these are God's chosen people. Judah is God's chosen people. He knows how wicked the Chaldeans are, the Babylonians. They're wicked, ruthless people. He knows these things. And he asks, why is God allowing this? This isn't fair. I think many of us struggle with these same things. We know who God is. We know what God can be like. We know what he can do. If we're Christians, we know that we are his. We are his chosen. We have his special love on us. We know how wicked the world can be. We know how sin has devastated many, many lives. And we ask, why is God allowing what has happened? Why is God allowing this? And whether we say it or not, in the back of our minds, we're thinking, this isn't fair. God, this isn't fair for these things to be happening to your own. But I think we can learn some things and how to respond to situations like these based on what Habakkuk teaches us here. And notice, before we dive into it, Habakkuk is going to express his questions. He's going to respectfully come to God. And I don't think we should look at this and say, and look down on Habakkuk for doing this, because I think in the back of our minds, we wrestle with, can I really ask God that? Is it really right for me to ask God certain questions? And I think we've all struggled with that at one time or another, but I think it's a good thing. And we learn that from Habakkuk here, and we also learn it from James. Remember what James said. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given him. But let him ask in faith, with no doubting, for the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind. For that person must not suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. He is a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. This is an important passage. If we lack wisdom, go to God in faith. Ask God your questions. And we're going to see that here in just a moment. So let's look at verses 14, and then we'll read down to chapter 2, verse 1. Habakkuk looked for God to answer his prayers. Look at this. He says in verse 14, you make mankind like the fish of the sea, like crawling things that have no ruler. He brings all of them up with a hook. He drags them out with his net. He gathers them in his dragnet. So he rejoices and is glad. Therefore he sacrifices to his net and makes offerings to his dragnet. For by them he lives in luxury, and his food is rich. Is he then to keep on emptying his net and mercilessly killing nations forever? I will take my stand at my watchpost and station myself on the tower and look out to see what he will say to me and what I will answer concerning my complaints. Now, from the context, Habakkuk has to be talking about the Chaldeans. He has to be talking about the Babylonians. And here's what Habakkuk is doing. He's making his case to God, if you will. It's weird for us to think that, but that's what he's doing. He's stating his case to God. He's saying, this isn't fair, and here's why. Here's exactly who I'm talking about, this wicked people. And here's what he makes of it. The Chaldeans did not value life. Just like the sea is full of endless fish, the Chaldeans did not place value on people's lives. They were a ruthless, horrible, killing machine. They did not value people. In fact, we read in other passages that the Babylonians enjoyed killing. They did not value anything about life. Habakkuk could not understand why God was allowing this type of people to conquer Judah. Not only that, we learn here the Chaldeans worshipped idols. They worshiped their military might. Now, we looked at that a little bit last week as well. They worshiped their money. They worshiped their stuff. It talks about their value, their luxury, their food is rich. We read these things and we say they valued these things more than anything else. These were their gods to them. They worshiped these things. Again, Habakkuk is saying, God, this isn't fair. These people are wicked. They don't honor you in any way. Not only that, he goes on. The Chaldeans, remember, he's stating his case to God here, and it sounds pretty convincing. The Chaldeans' wickedness seemed to have no end in sight. Habakkuk couldn't understand how God could tolerate such injustice, such wickedness to his chosen people. The problem for Habakkuk is that all three of these conditions existed at the same time. He knows God is sovereign. He knows God is holy. He knows the Babylonians are wicked. The Chaldeans are wicked people, yet they prosper. It doesn't make any sense to him. He's asking, is God fair? But look at chapter 2, verse 1. Here's where the difference happens. Most of us would read that and we'd see this happening and we would probably retreat in some ways. But look what he does. Chapter 2, verse 1. I will take my stand at my watchpost and station myself on the tower and look out to see what he will say to me and what I will answer concerning my complaint. Habakkuk went to God. He stated his complaint and he stated his questions. He stated his objections. He made his case, but in the end, he waited for God to answer. He knew God would respond. He didn't run from God. He didn't say, I'm done. He said he went to God. He took his watchpost like a warrior back in those days would do. They were positioned to wait and see if an enemy was coming or look for a response from someone else. Habakkuk was doing the same things. He knew God would answer him. Though he didn't understand, he knew God would answer him. He was trusting in God. I read something this last week. I've been reading this book on, it's like 31 days to trusting God or something like that. And it's been really, really challenging for me, but in a good way. He said this, Jerry Bridges, he wrote this: our first priority in adversity is to honor and glorify God by trusting him. Gaining relief from our feelings of heartache or disappointment or frustration is a natural desire. And God has promised to give us grace sufficient for all our trials and peace for all our anxieties. But just as God's will is to take precedence over our will, so God's honor is to take precedence over our feelings. We honor God by choosing to trust him when we don't understand what he is doing or why he has allowed some adverse circumstance to occur. Couldn't put it any better. We trust God even when we may be angry, we may be saddened, whatever your response is to the situation. We trust the mighty, sovereign, holy name of God. Now let's look at the Lord's response, verses 2 through 5. Habakkuk learned to live by faith. Verse 2, it says, and the Lord answered me, write the vision, make it plain on tablets, so he may run who reads it. For still the vision awaits its appointed time. It hastens to the end. It will not lie. If it seems slow, wait for it. It will surely come. It will not delay. Behold, his soul is puffed up. It is not upright within him, but the righteous shall live by his faith. Moreover, wine is a traitor, an arrogant man who is never at rest. His greed is as wide as Sheol. Like death, he has never enough. He gathers for himself all nations and collects as his own all peoples. God teaches us, I believe, three things in his response here about how to view when we don't understand his plans. The first one he teaches us is that God can be trusted. We saw that at the end of Habakkuk's response. He was waiting for God. He was trusting that God would respond, and we see that here as well. I ask you, why would someone want something written down if you couldn't trust that he was going to keep it? Why would God want that? He's teaching Habakkuk here, as well as he's going to teach future generations that read this as well. And they're wondering the same thing while they're in captivity. God, why are you doing this? Why is this fair? Why do we care? And we could read these things today, and we're getting a lot out of this. We find ourselves in some similar situations, and we're asking God the same questions. I believe these are written down because we can have confidence that God will keep his word. We can trust God. The same author, he said, because we know that God is directing our lives to an ultimate end, and because we know he is sovereignly able to orchestrate the events of our lives towards that end, we can trust him. Our beliefs determine our conduct. And when we trust God, we are going to handle these situations different. We are going to go through, even though we may not understand fully what you're doing, God, we can go through and trust him through it. Second, we find here God answers prayer according to his timing. Notice what he said. He said, Habakkuk used two words to describe God's fulfillment. He said, the appointed time. God never said, I'm going to do this right now. God is fulfilling, and he will fulfill this prophecy eventually, but it's in his timing, not in ours. And that is probably one of the biggest frustrations we have, is God's timing not lining up with our timing, isn't it? We want God to do this right now when we want it, and often God says, no, I'm going to make you wait. Isaiah, and that's not a bad thing, Isaiah points it like this: but they who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. And I read several of these passages this week about just waiting on the Lord. And we could have spent half an hour just talking about that this morning. This is a common issue that believers for centuries have dealt with, waiting on the Lord. And we see passages like this that tell us it's worth it. But then last, God says, and the lesson we learn here is that God desires faithfulness while we wait. God is teaching Habakkuk the contrast between those who are faithful and those who are faithless. The Chaldeans who are faithless, and much of Judah who could have been put in that same category, who were faithless, that would not trust God. And then he's talking about the faithful. Pride characterized the faithless, the unfaithful. He uses the term being puffed up. He's describing the Chaldeans here. He's talking about how they think more of themselves, too highly of themselves. And this is what describes the faithless, the unfaithful to God. But he's saying the humble realize that faith characterizes the faithful. You must remain faithful. The righteous shall live by his faith. This is seen all throughout and is quoted a number of times in the New Testament. One of those passages is Romans 1:17. For in it, Paul said, for in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith for faith. As it is written, the righteous shall live by faith. Through every generation, this has been the call. Live a faithful life. Be faithful to God. You want to know what the ordinary Christian life is? It's faithfulness. Live faithfully for God. Faith is not a one-time act, as we see here. Faith is a way of life. Faith is something that continues in our life. Faith is believing God and acting upon that belief. It's faithfully pursuing him and desiring to know him better in our daily lives. The true believer who is declared righteous by God will persevere in the faith in this life. Another author, she said this: genuine faith trusts the word of God through and through. This is how the righteous would live by faith, in contrast to the Babylonians, the Chaldeans, who trusted only in themselves. Again, verse 5, the last verse we looked at, switches back. He's doing this compare and contrast. Here's what the faithless looks like, the unfaithful: pride, arrogance, greed. We see all these things describing the faithless. We're called to not be like that. So what does it mean to be faithful? There are many passages that we could look at that describes an ordinary Christian life. I tend to like to go back and see what the early church was like. In Acts 2:42, I think we get a glimpse of what faithfulness looks like. It says, and they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and the fellowship, to the breaking of bread and the prayers. What does it mean to be faithful? Those who were a part of the earliest stages of the church, this is what they sought to do. It was four things, and I think it's four things we can implement or do on a daily basis as well. It's a good starting point. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, Scripture. They wanted to know Scripture. They wanted to be filled with more and more Scripture. Second, they were committed to fellowship. They knew they could not do this life alone. They needed one another. They needed other Christian friendships. They knew they needed one another to do this life, because often we can get stuck in our head and we have a hard time. Myself, I'm describing personally. I have a hard time expressing what all is going through my mind. We need other Christian friendships to help us work through those things in this life. Often we may be unbeknownst that there's a sin in our lives that we don't really realize, and we need other Christians to come and admonish us and say, hey, I think you're missing the part, you're missing the mark here. We need that in our lives. Third, they broke bread together. Now, some think this refers to communion. Others think it was a meal they would share together. Either way, they were committed to doing life together. They knew they needed to do the one another's together. And then last, they were committed to prayer. Maybe the easiest thing we could do. Yet, my life, I find often the most forgotten, right? You forget about it. You get in your routines. This was a regular part of their lives. The point being, we look at all these things. God values faithfulness. The righteous shall live by his or her faith. Faithfulness looks just like that. Live and pursue righteousness. Pursue God with all our being. Pursue him. Now, two thoughts as we close. First, if you're not a Christian, or you've been wrestling through these things, if you've been trying to figure out where I'm at in this spectrum, whether I really want to commit my life to God or not, or maybe you just know someone who is wrestling with these things, this is a good book that describes what the faithless and what the faithful look like. The faithful pursue Christ. The unfaithful do not. Repent and believe in Christ today. Repent and believe. Commit your life to pursuing him. God's promises are for you. The fact in knowing, and Habakkuk points this out well, God is eternal. There's no time frame with him. God, he chooses to work in our time frame, which is a whole nother discussion that our minds just can't fully grasp. God is holy. He is perfect. There is no sin. There is no injustice with God. And then knowing that God is unchangeable. He keeps his word. There's very few people in this life who have not let us down in one way or another because they don't keep their word. God always keeps his word. God does not change. Trust Christ. Trust him with your life and pursue him. And for the Christian, I know we have these questions. Is God fair? Does God care? I think we can see here, just by looking at the Lord's response to Habakkuk, that God does care. God does see the injustices, and God has a plan that is far greater, far bigger. Now, the hard part, and I know, is that that plan often does not line up with what we want. We want this, and when God says, no, I have something else for you, that's where the struggle comes. But learn from this and say, but I'm going to live by faith. The righteous live by faith. That's my challenge for you this week. Commit to living by faith. Remain faithful. Pursue Christ. Love your neighbor and give the rest to God. Let us pray. Father, thank you today that we can trust you, that though life throws us many curveballs, you remain steady. You remain faithful. You remain unmovable, even if we don't always realize it. You are there. And Lord, we just ask that you will show us your grace. We've already seen that this morning by giving us passages like this in Habakkuk, but I just pray that you will pour out your love pour out your mercy on us as we try to take what we're reading and put it into practice. Lord, it's easy to read these things. It's not always so easy to put them into practice. But help us to daily put aside the old self and put on the new self that is in Christ. And that looks like living by faith for you. Help us as we continue to persevere, and that ultimately you will receive all the honor and glory. And in your name I pray. Amen.